Hi, everybody. My name is Anna Waismeyer, and my pronouns are she, her. And I'm a senior product manager on the Gaming for Everyone team at Xbox. And I'm really excited today to be joined by a wonderful panel of developers that you see right here to talk about what developer teams can do to help expand both the culture and the integration of accessible design into the way that your teams think about games and game development. So without further ado, let's go ahead and meet this panel. Apurva, would you like to introduce yourself real fast?
Sure. I'm Apurva Raman. I'm on the Minecraft education development team, specifically within Mojang Studios. I'm a software engineer, and I use she, her, and they, them pronouns.
Awesome. Thank you. DJ, why don't you go next?
I'm DJ Stiner, Senior PM on the Platform Partnership Program within Mojang. I am the accessibility champ for the studio and help coordinate, facilitate any questions that folks might have and evangelize accessibility across the studio. And I use the he, they pronouns.
Awesome. Thank you, DJ. Kevin.
Hi, I'm Kevin Johnson. I'm the Director of Development at Double Fine, and I use he, him pronouns.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kevin. And Stefan.
Hi, I'm Stefan Damberg. I'm a lead gameplay programmer at Compulsion Games. I'm also one of our local accessibility champs. So as such, I'm very interested in accessibility, and I use he, him pronouns.
Welcome to everybody. Thank you so much for being here today. So we're gonna dive right in to see to make sure we get as much time as possible with these questions. So my first question for all of you today is about resources. So what resources are available to set targets for accessibility? And do you have any tips on making sure that you're able to hit those targets throughout development? Stefan, why don't we start with you?
Yes, happy to kick this off. I think one of the most valuable resources we had in our development for our last game, Souls of Midnight, was the inclusive design workshop. We did it once and it carried us all throughout the project. Just a very nice platform to get people in the team engaged with the topic accessibility. Also, I think a really strong point is just meeting people that need those kind of accessibility affordances and really put a face to the abstract concept. Suddenly low vision is not just a checkbox you tick off, but oh, this is this person that needs to play our game. And suddenly there's much more motivation behind it. It becomes much more real. And yeah, if I can share a little bit of a success story for the inclusive design workshop, in our last workshop, we had at the very beginning of the project, one of the ideas was what we then called the golden path, which then I was really excited about, and I will neither confirm nor deny if I went a little bit rogue and made a little proof of concept prototype. And then it became, in the end, a helper strand, which is now a really one of our core accessibility features in Souls of Midnight. You can learn more about this in our other talk about weaving accessibility into the game. But it's really those small ideas that really inspire the team, that help them see the possibilities, and then help them move forward and get excited about accessibility in your game. We are currently prepping for the next inclusive design workshop, and we are planning to do more throughout our upcoming project to really keep the team aligned with the idea and the goals of what accessibility can be.
That's awesome. I love hearing about that. And I did want to mention, just for the audience for this panel today, while the workshop that Stefan was referencing is obviously an internal one, we do have an external resource for folks to actually be able to do these kinds of workshops for their own studios. It's called the Game Accessibility Workshop Toolkit. And I'm sure we'll find a way to work with the Game Accessibility Conference folks to share links to that if folks are interested in trying to put on one of their own workshops for their own studios. Thank you so much. So Kevin, what are your thoughts on resources and setting targets?
Yeah, so coming off of an IDW, one of the sorry, excuse me. One of the things we use are definitely the the essentials, the accessibility essentials. It's a set of guidelines on different facets of the game, and they set really concrete things like font size that you should use and contrast that needs to happen, and I find it helps. It gives us a holistic view of how accessible our game is, and it kind of also provides that checkbox, checklist that the team can go down as we look across the whole game to make sure that we have just these very concrete things that we can say, okay, yep, we did that and it's good, and we know that if we hit all of those, that we are providing a generally accessible experience. We use that as a baseline for what we want to do in all our games.
I love that. That's great. Yeah. And actually, what do you guys think in terms of trying to make sure you hit those targets? I actually forgot to follow up with you, Stefan, too. I think you mentioned it a little bit, but like, how do you guys check in throughout development? Or what are some tips to be able to check in and make sure that you're hitting those targets?
I think a good strategy is to make this really part of your review process, really have check-in points, really define a goal and then also test against. It's just you would test with every other aspect of your game, be it performance, being just the fun, is it accessible, should be a question that is part of your review process. And because it is not something that just happens in the end, you don't just add a feature in the end and then your game is suddenly accessible. It is something that needs to be iterated on constantly, and it has to be thought of from the beginning and has to make it all the way through the end. And so regular check-ins, make it part of your review process, have those kind of questions in whatever questionnaire you have, and really check against it and make sure you check in on it.
Yeah, I echo what Stefan is saying. The key performance indicator. What is your goal? What is the promise, the player promise there? And working with leadership and working with your studios to across the studio or your development team to set one of those goals of one feature shipped each year or one feature improved each year. It's different for a new game in development versus a game that's out in the shipped already and is in live ops or a supported development area. And so if you have that one or two that you're going to hit or these features you're going to hit, as Stefan said, that's a promise that you're going to have to support and iterate on throughout the life cycle of the product. And that could be improving on it after it ships. That could be shipping a new one each quarter or year, and then using user research to help you understand what the reception is on where the problem space is or what players are asking for.
I love that. Yeah. And if folks, just to kind of mention some resources here too, are interested, Kevin, I think you mentioned something like essentials or having these kinds of core targets that you might want. The Xbox accessibility guidelines are also publicly available. There's a lot of content in there, but that's a great starting point for potentially creating your own set of essentials or core targets for your studio. Doesn't necessarily mean you're going to cover every single thing in those Xbox accessibility guidelines. There's a lot of great stuff in there, and we know it's hard for studios to hit all of those. But go through them as a studio, figure out how to define success for yourself in accessibility, and see which of those you can bring into and create your own set of core standards or essentials for your studio and what that means for you. So just want to make a plug for those two. There's lots of other guidelines out there as well. Sounds the ones we're most familiar with. Awesome. All right. Well, let's go ahead and move on to question 2, but feel free to refer back to this or continue building on this these responses throughout the panel. So question number 2 here. So what are the benefits of different team structures for ensuring that everybody on a game is designing with accessibility in mind? So something I think all three of you actually have mentioned for that first question is the idea of really weaving it, which I love, weaving the strand inside of midnight, right? But weaving it into your development processes. So, for example, does it help to have a dedicated accessibility individual or a team? A couple of, I think all of you actually have mentioned accessibility camps, things like that. What are some tips you might have for studios trying to get a foothold in here and starting to think about this? Apurva.
Yeah, I think the answer to this question is, as these things tend to be, sort of a mix of everything. Obviously, the more investment that you have in accessibility, the more accessibility you will be able to do, right? And I think within the Xbox studios, we're really lucky to have a lot of really dedicated accessibility experts that developers like me can leverage as accessibility champs within studios. And on Minecraft Education specifically, we're really lucky to have people in every product discipline, right, who are really, and in every part of development, who are really, interested in and passionate about accessibility. And I think that type of thing is contagious, right? If you are advocating for accessibility, and especially something that I've found is sharing my own personal experience with disability and with the impact that game accessibility has on me, not only on my ability to play and enjoy, but my ability to test and play the thing that I work on, right? That's a really powerful story. And I think there is sort of arguments to be made from, sort of top-down pushes and resourcing for accessibility and sort of the bottom-up going rogue and prototyping, as Stefan was mentioning earlier. And the answer is it works really well when you have all of the pieces in place. You have people who have the time and resources and brain space to really dive deep into accessibility as a core part of their role. And then the rest of the studio sort of taking that and running with it, right? And that passion and knowledge sort of being shared and growing over time in the whole organization. And I think that's the way that I think you get really sustained prioritization of accessibility and real success.
I love that. Thank you. That's awesome. Stefan, any thoughts on this one?
Yes, I can echo a lot of what Apurva said. I talked to a lot of different Xbox studios in preparation for our new project because I also wanted to find out, hey, how does this work best? And there's something to be said for a distributed team where everybody is empowered to care about accessibility. Because I think ultimately it leads to better results if people think about accessibility as part of their particular discipline, no matter where they are in the project. That just helps to produce more insightful results that actually help and that actually can push the boundaries a bit and not just check off a list. But it comes at the downside of educating everyone on what is needed is hard. Aligning everyone on what is needed is hard. And if you leave this topic to everyone, that also means everybody is at some point at the point where they have to make a call. Hey, can I put my time into this accessibility feature, or I have to do this other thing that the director really, really wants? And that's a tough call to make, and that is just the reality of making games. Versus on the other hand, if you have a dedicated team, that brings a bit more accountability. It brings a bit more structure. It actually provides a team that can actually build up the knowledge base and dive into all the resources and make a coherent strategy. But it comes at the cost of the team can get complacent and just fall into a rhythm of, oh, it's somebody else's job to take care of this. Somebody else will fix this in the end. I'm just doing my little thing, and then somebody else can come in to make it accessible. And that is just usually not how good accessibility is made. It's usually not added at the end. It is thought about from the beginning. And between those two, which is the best one? That depends on your studio, that depends on your culture, that depends on where you are in the project. I don't think there's a perfect answer that works for everyone. That is more something you have to figure out what works inside your studio.
Yeah, I love that. Kevin, do you have any thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I mean, just to kind of go off of that, I think, it is going to be dependent on how your studio works, but I think the key thing, and it's been stressed, is to make sure that however you're doing it, that there is that accountability. So if it is an individual or if it is a team, what are they measuring against, and how are you expecting to see that manifesting in the current title, the next one, that roadmap? And so on some level, there's got to be buy-in at a higher level in the studio so that that roadmap can be created, that you are then holding those people against, because then otherwise you'll get a kind of a spark and a flare out, right? Like it's all gonna be really awesome for that one moment where we're all thinking about it, and then we stop thinking about it and it kind of fades away into the background. So regardless of what it looks like kind of on the project level, there also needs to be that buy-in at studio leadership level to make sure that whoever is being made responsible actually also has the accountability.
Yeah, I love that. I love, I'm hearing there's not a one size fits all, right? Like maybe explore as a studio, somebody in the audience trying to think about this, trying to figure this out for your own studio, like exploring different options, think about how your team works, what might be a really good fit for that. It probably also depends on studio size, right? It's going to be hard for a smaller studio to actually have a whole dedicated team just to accessibility. So how can that be something that's just integrated into everybody's roles, which I really love. I love this idea of like, you need that bottom-up passion, that understanding folks who are living and breathing the game day in and day out, being able to think about accessibility, but then they also need that top-down support of like, hey, if I'm spending time on this, if I'm weaving this into what I'm working on right now, that's going to be supported and celebrated in something that I can eventually like make good on, right? So I love this balance across this. This is awesome. Thank you. All right, let's move on to the next question, question number 3. So this one's about any tips or recommended activities that you would share with folks here, the audience, that would help keep everybody educated, right? So we talked about being able to integrate it for everybody across the studio to have some sense of accessibility, what that means, how they advocate for it. What's the way of keeping everybody educated on what those best practices are for game accessibility, or empowering them to be able to bring this up during development? Kevin, let's start with you.
All right. Well, for us, I think we have a Slack channel dedicated to it, DF accessibility. And as we learn things through the user research in the accessibility group here, as people find certain things or whatever they come across, it all goes there. And the point is to keep the conversation going all the time. It's right there alongside any other studio-wide Slack channel that we have. So it's not meant to be off in its corner as a thing. It's just a thing that we talk about in the course of what we do, along with anything else we might be talking about. And that works really well for us, where we kind of live on Slack at Double Fine. So it's what works best for us.
That's great. Yeah. So having like a dedicated communication channel, something that everybody can see, be part of, and be involved in. Apurva, do you have any thoughts on this one?
Yeah, there's a couple of things that I found to be really effective. And I think it's about sort of what others have said about accessibility needing to be iterated on at every step of the process. If you are, advocating for accessibility and trying to keep others educated, one of the ways that I found that's pretty late in the process that I think can be really impactful beyond just the moment is in playtesting. If you're playtesting something, it doesn't need to be an accessibility playtest for you to give accessibility feedback. And having those conversations about like, hey, here's something that I found difficult. And I think it ties to sort of the value of prototyping something too, as an accessibility feature, is it makes it real around the kinds of things where people might not be able to concretely understand why an accessibility feature is so important until seeing how it affects the experience. And often accessibility things are general usability gains too. And being able to say, you know, this helps all our players in this way, and, you know, we're able to reach players we weren't able to reach before. That kind of thing can build a lot of momentum. And I think in general, things like, you know, your developer learning talks that you might have internally, or design and code reviews, like every piece of that, the more that you can sort of drum the accessibility drumbeat, right? Naturally, everyone's knowledge will grow. And I think it's often like a really great moment for me when I'm working with someone new or in a new team or doing something with a different group of people, where I start talking about accessibility. And then, you know, a few months later, I don't even have to be the one to say it, right? Someone else will start saying that thing way before I do. And that's the moment, right, where you start to build that core set of knowledge across the team in a way that makes it much more likely that you're going to catch things and think about things earlier and earlier in the process.
Yeah, I love that. That's great. You offered up a bunch of different ideas there, but I love this idea too, that like just because something isn't, you know, specifically an accessibility targeted activity that you might be doing for your game doesn't mean that accessibility is part of it. So I love that. Like, okay, what are potentially some moments that you already have built in for your game? Like if you're working with a contract and different milestones, things like that, how can you build accessibility into those, right? So love that idea. I love those moments and create those education moments for folks. DJ, do you have some additional thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I think that leaning 100% on what was said before, like there's and bringing up the user research again, there's surveys around what players are asking for, and data has shown that they're not always aware that something's an accessibility feature. And when we see that feature request or prioritization come in the vote count, oh, interesting. And you find that it's not something that is top of mind for everybody, but there's also a way to frame it for, what games have you shipped in the past? What accessibility features were in that game and how did the players receive them? And ask teams that early on when they're going for that next thing that they're doing. Workshops, open office hours, learning sessions of what other games are doing, and bring those into that cohort and talk about them. It might not be the right feature for your game, but maybe it's something to start talking about how you can do something different in that space.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. It reminds me too about some, one time I was talking to some players and they did talk about like how they don't have any accessibility needs, but they need to turn on subtitles because sometimes they have trouble hearing things. And I was like, so you do actually have it's about identity, right? That idea, like they didn't identify as having a disability and therefore they didn't identify as having accessibility needs. But that, accessibility is so much broader than, right, that specificity there. It's about making sure that folks can, adjust and customize the experience to what's going to work best for them, right? Whatever that might be. So yeah, I love that. Awesome. Well, let's go ahead and get to our closing questions, our last question, and hoping we'll be able to squeeze in time for everybody to respond to this one. But yeah, so just closing out here, what is, we've got this wonderful audience at the Game Accessibility Conference. Shout out to all of those folks watching right now, in the future, right now. But if we were able to tell them one thing right now, what is your number one tip to other developers who are working on this, trying to get accessibility and accessible design into their studio, their product team, or maybe they're students and they're trying to figure out what could I do when I do get a job or when I do join a place that would start to further accessible design and what that means. So yeah, without further ado, let's go ahead and start with Stefan. It's been a little while since you heard from me.
I think my number one tip is lead with empathy, make it about humans. in the whole discussion about accessibility, like easy to get lost in a concept. And there's a time and place for the cold head numbers and looking at statistics and looking which features used the most and by whom. And that is all a valuable discussion. But in the end, I always come back to it's about humans. It's about I'm making games because I want people to play the games I make. I want to reach them. I want to touch them. And some people will have a harder time with some of the things I make than others. And sometimes there are easy steps I can take to make them enjoy the game that I'm making. And ultimately, that's what I'm here for. And that's what I want to achieve. So if you want to take one thing away from me, like think about the people you're trying to reach and don't make it about abstract numbers, make it about people and try to reach as many people as you can with like the resources that you have available to you.
I love that. That's great. Apurva.
Yeah, I think sort of the other side of this is that especially like I came out of college and I knew I wanted to make games and I knew I wanted to make games more accessible too. And that's sort of an interesting place to be starting, right? But I knew that that's what I wanted to do. And it was a bit of a winding path to get there, both get into working on games specifically and getting to be an accessibility champ. And I knew that while I had personal experience and I had talked to a lot of really great folks in the industry and had attended GAConf in college and everything too. Like this was a great resource. I knew that like it was going to be a sort of a long journey and that I would never there would never be a point in which I could stop learning, right? There will always be more things to learn from in terms of both accessibility strategies and like knowledge about the how to design and build for people with disabilities. And thinking about the importance of co-design and really spending time with people who might. I think one of the biggest things is like I learned, I kind of knew from the outset that people with very different disabilities from mine would have very different experiences. But the same is true for people who go through life with a lot of the same challenges that I do, right? For whom games offer the same somewhat like obstacles. The way that they might choose to deal with that and their preferred ways of games sort of removing those obstacles for them might be totally different from mine. And so I think the more time that I spend like in that learning space, the better. And it can be kind of exhausting doing this kind of advocacy push, especially when you learn so much about what could be done, and then you can achieve like a tiny, tiny fraction of it. But that tiny fraction can be really, really rewarding, and making sure that you sort of take care of yourself, that you work on whatever you work on pretty sustainably, that like maximizes the impact that you can have for yourself and for others. And so I think maintaining that balance, which feels like it's a bit of a theme of this conversation, is really important.
Oh, I love that. That's great. Yeah. Yeah. And I know actually here at GAConf, right, we've heard talks about the burnout and the exhaustion. Mm-hmm. So taking care of yourself is really important as well, right? Keeping up that energy. Kevin, any last?
Yeah, I'd say if one thing to take away is to remember to just emphasize that accessible design is just good design, and the ways we think about implementing certain things, a lot of the times it only takes minor tweaks up front in order to make what you're doing far more accessible than you realize it could be. And so just keeping that in mind in basically every aspect of what you're doing, that incorporating accessibility just makes everything that you're doing better, and keeping that as a core tenet of everyone's mentality as they build the game.
Awesome. Thank you. And DJ, closing this out.
Games have been out for a long time. We now have multiple generations gaming. Children have mobility issues. They can't do some of the things that some games ask them to do because their hands aren't developed yet enough to do it. And older generations are losing the mobility they once had. And much like us bringing games to be more accessible, it's a journey, it's not a destination, even in our own accessibility needs. There's rarely a one solution fits all. Just trying to make something better because everybody is different. We have early game development thinking about the design first principle because it's only going to be harder for you down the road after your game is out the door. And I think as I look in this call, we have at least 3 of us who are wearing an accessible device. These are an example of just where we need accessibility in our day-to-day.
Yeah, I love that. That was beautiful. Thank you. Well, thank you all for taking your time this morning to pre-record this panel. I hope everybody in the GA conference audience right now watching this enjoyed this. And yeah, thanks everybody. And we'll hopefully talk again soon, maybe in person in GAConf. We'll see. Awesome.
Thank you.
Thanks. Lee.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Everyone.